Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia, and I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. In new releases and reviews this week, we have 9 stories that I read and reviewed for you folks at home. That's right, 9, and I'm totally caught up on all the latest LitRPG. Don't have anything to push in next week at all, so I'm super happy about that I finally caught up. It's been a long, 6 weeks of at least, 6 to 8 novels coming out every single week. But I finished, so yay. Okay. The stuff I'm reviewing this week though, the Critical Failures V is for 5. That's a book 5 in the Creatures in Caverns book series. And the next one is going to be the Hour of Pain, which is a bonus short story from the Way the Shaman author, Vasily Mahenko. Then another short story called The Bard. It's book 4 in the Greenwood series. And then Master of the Game, additionally. Virtual War, Alpha Centauri, a LitRPG novel. Then after that, Overlord Warriors, LitRPG Saga, Graven Vengeance, book 5. After that, I'll be reviewing The Merchant of Tikpa 2, the 5th book in the Bathrobe Knight series. I know. Okay, then after that, The Princess of Panchala, a LitRPG novel in the TerraMythos series, a fusion of mythology and MMORPG. That is the entire title. And then last but not least, Eondrias, book 1, a new master of dungeons. So we have 9 books. Not all the reviews are super long. They didn't need to be, but we're going to get right into it. Because there is no LitRPG news, there were no new audiobooks, no real stories this week. So we're actually just going to go right into, I'll play some music, then I'll read you the upcoming stuff. So cue the music. And that was our music. Again, like I said, no LitRPG news really this week. No new audiobooks either, but I'll read you a quick rundown of the upcoming LitRPG for the end of April and the beginning of May. Again, there's a longer list of upcoming LitRPG on our Facebook page and our website at geekbestpodcast.com under the recommendation page, LitRPG. There's a whole calendar thing almost of stuff going out to July. But for April, we have April 25th. This is Our Land, book 5 in the Immobilia series. On April 28th, we'll be getting The Lost Archive, a LitRPG adventure. On May the 1st, Ascent Online, Hell to Pay. That's book 2 in that series. On May the 3rd, a new story on the list, Gank, a LitRPG adventure, The Crucible Shard, book 4. We just read book 3 not too long ago. And on May the 9th, it'll be The First Player, Alter Game, book 1. Then on the 27th of May, it'll be Stuck in an RPG. And on May the 31st, The Eternal Dragonborn, book 2 in the Worlds of Gaim. So there you go. I think we have more in June and July, but you can look at the list for that. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with Critical Failures V. V is for 5. Written by Robert Bevan. This is book 5 in the Creatures and Caverns. The Caverns and Creatures series. It is 303 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And now this is the author's description of the story. Many view hitting rock bottom as foundation on which to rebuild one's life, a place from which one can only ascend. Gamers notice search for a secret door leading down to the sewer, though. Okay, Robert Bevan is absolutely hilarious. All of his novels in this series are just gut-wrenchingly funny for me, and for a lot of people, they work as well. But you gotta kind of like a certain type of sense of humor, very potty humor, lots of cursing, jokes galore of inappropriateness. I always often think of Robert Bevan as the Kevin Smith of the LitRPG world. Very similar sense of humor, but it's always fun if you're into that kind of humor, of course. Now, in the 5th book in the series, the core gang that we've come to love over the course of the last 4 books is kind of breaking up, which is sad, but it also allows for some interesting story opportunities. Stacy and her brother Tim are on their own. Tempers flare when the larger group thinks Tim is trying to screw them over after a member of his group accidentally steals the dice they need to get home to the real world. That's kind of a summary of the runs. Now, what follows is a funny, multi-narrative story where everyone is searching for Tim. People are forced to take sides, and of course, nothing goes as planned for anybody. This book is just funny. All of these books in this series are absolutely funny to me. And again, this is a slightly different point of view in that because there are a lot of smaller groups, there's a lot of individual stories that follow parallel paths but don't always intersect, or they intersect for a little while and they split off again. And it's going to be a little confusing for anybody who's not already familiar with this series, which is one of the flaws in any kind of series like this. When you get to book 5, 6, 7, whatever, you tend to have a lot of characters in your story, especially if you've been sticking to like a similar area for a very long time. You just build up new people. And that's kind of the case here, in that there are a lot of people, which means there are a lot of multiple narratives to hold on to. So if you've never read anything in this series, I wouldn't start here. I would really go back to book 1. And the author very often has book 1 in this series on sale for either 99 cents or even for free. So it's not it's not expensive to pick up, but that's a better place to start. If you're already familiar with the series, you've probably heard about the book and you're probably enjoying it just like I did. But again, there are tons of humorous moments and a lot of WTF moments. Like, very often while reading this, I was like, what? Where did this come from? And that's a choice, but in a very funny, appreciative way. So there you go. It's a great story. Enjoyed it. 7 out of 10. Okay, on to our next book in the story, podcast, I should say, The Hour of Pain, The Way of the Shaman, a bonus story. And for a bonus story, it's pretty expensive. I will read you the author description. It is let's see. Attention all LitRPG readers, this is a special edition bonus story for those Way the Shaman fans who don't want to wait for the translation of Book 6. This isn't a new novel, but a short story chock full of spoilers. And they mean spoilers for mostly books 1 through, like, what happened in Book 5. This isn't a new novel. The story retells the climactic ending of Book 5 from the viewpoint of Anastasia. Okay, this is about 20 pages. There's currently no page listing on Amazon as of this recording. It is $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Again, one of the biggest flaws of this one is that it's so darn expensive. Again, for about 20 pages, about 15, 20 minutes worth of reading time, $2.99. It's a little pricey, but if you're a super big Way the Shaman fan, this is going to be worth it, because it kind of takes that last ending scene at the end of Book 5 and turns it on its head a little bit. And it kind of explains why the author wrote it the way he did. And hopefully it'll soothe some tempers of people who were angry at the end of Book 5. Again, it's a really short read. And if it wasn't such an expensive proposition to read, I mean, I understand that translation costs money, but 20 pages with a translation probably shouldn't cost half as much as a book. Like I said, that's my opinion. And I can foresee that it's going to be an issue in some of the reviews as well. So I'm just giving you a heads up about it. You might, kind of depends on your fandom in this case. Especially considering that all the stuff in this short story is probably going to be covered by Book 6. So if you skip it, you're not really missing out on anything. But if you can't wait and you have the spare cash, go for it, I guess. But me, I liked it. I just wish it was cheaper or on Kindle Unlimited. I give it a 7 out of 10. Okay, on to our next short story. The Bard, a LitRPG short story, The Greenwood, Book 4. One of the first things I thought of when I saw that title was, where'd Book 3 go? I read Book 1. I read Book 2, which is the Runesmith. Book 3's disappeared, and this is Book 4, so that's just me, though. The summary from the author is, Romeo El Major, the best bard in the world, or at least in the city of Venab, in the virtual reality massive multiplayer online game, The Greenwood, is about to put on a play when a goddess appears and asks him to run an errand for her. She promises him a plus 10 boost to all stats for a month, so how could he refuse? She's also remarkably pretty. This is a lighthearted LitRPG story set in The Greenwood. Okay, my opinion. This is 66 pages. It is 99 cents, and it's available on Kindle Unlimited. Very nice price, by the way. This is a short story again, not that long, but it does a really good job of telling a very compact and efficient story. Most stories portray the bard as a kind of a loser class in either an RPG or a tabletop that only works in a group as someone who buffs other people. So they can't, it's really hard. In most of the stories I've written, the bard is never the hero. He's never a singular character who just does an amazing job. He's always with the group because, most of his skills are, buff based or group based. And this story kind of advocates the bard as actually one of the most powerful classes, at least in that game world, of the Greenwood, when played correctly. This is a maxed out bard character, and it's kind of interesting to see how the author uses those bard skills in very fun, interesting, and profitable ways for the character. When the main character is tasked with recovering a magic mirror from a necromancer, he uses his magic and acting skills to find the clues to accomplish his goal. So it's all, the character uses his class skills as part of that role playing. It's not just the fighting part. He is also using it in gathering information, which I had never really thought of, but it kind of makes sense for a charisma based class. Additionally, the fighting was top notch. I mean, there's not a ton. There's not a big story. There's not enough room for like more than one or two fight scenes. But the way that the author used the bard's class skills in battle against the big necromancer was really cool. I really did enjoy the variety of skills. This isn't as action oriented as any of the stories. It's also not as funny as book 2, which is why it doesn't get as good of a score for me. But it still was enjoyable romp in this world with a different class, which is something that the author has done repeatedly within the series. He gives you different character points of views in different classes, and I like that as these short stories and the main story combine, you get a much fuller feel and of the world of the Greenwood. So it's always nice to step back into this world. But for me, get a score of a 6 out of 10. Okay, on to Master of the Game, Gabria Online Book 1, written by Bimbia. Sorry. Okay, it is 40 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description of the story. It is, after a terrible accident ruins his life, Daniel finds a new one inside of Gabria Online, the world's first virtual reality MMORPG. Inside Gabria, Daniel is a mesmer, a support class that uses hypnosis and mind control to weaken the enemies before charming them into turning against their compatriots. I'm going to skip a little bit here. But when Daniel finds a strange tower in the wood that leads to a secret developer-built treasure room, he patches the entire game world into a shocking new form. Suddenly, players are able to hurt each other with swords and spells, and death has more consequences than a simple respawn. And Daniel discovers that mesmers have the ability to use their powers to control other players, like the gorgeous elf girl he's been lusting after for weeks. Okay. Real quick warning for anybody who's interested in the story. One, super short. For the price, it's a little expensive. But again, it's on Kindle Limited. Now, the bigger warning is that there's a ton of sex in this story, like graphic, hardcore sex. This is more, at least half of the story, full-on erotica sex story. The other half is LitRPG, as much as a short story can be. The author has a slew of other erotic stories about women whom through one means or another become submissive, sexy beings for the pleasure of the main character. So if you look up the author's author page, that's what you're going to find mostly. And that's what this feels like an attempt to be. It feels like an attempt to mush what the author does well with LitRPG, which they may be interested in jumping into as a new place to write their stories and for a new audience, perhaps. And it does a passable job. But because you're mushing two different genres that may not necessarily fit that well together, some people do it well, some people don't, but it's kind of unknown for a lot of people. It wasn't my favorite story. I'll get right into the actual review portion of it. Again, a really short fiction. It only lasted about 20 minutes, which was in that, stamina driven. And again, it's more erotic fantasy than LitRPG, but it does qualify as LitRPG because it follows those two, conditions that I've talked about before. The first 50% of the story is mostly setup. The main character loses use of his legs, loses friends, family, then finds the latest full immersion VR game where he can walk again. That takes up a good bulk of the beginning part of the story. And then it jumps 2 weeks ahead as soon as the player jumps in the game capsule to get into the game. And the character is magically level 7 Mesmer. And it goes on to describe, some of the class abilities. And then he hooks up with, groups up with a female character. And they're looking for this mysterious tower. And that's kind of the plot. Then the last half of it, the last 50% of it is really just all sex. It's the main character uses his control spells on the female player he's with to uninhibit her. And they just have a bunch of sex. And part of the plot is that the two of them have changed the fundamental nature of the game because they unlock this tower. And that's opened up full-on player versus player mode, and players can use their spells on each other now. And so the game has changed. And I really did like that premise of it. Like, how would a control character, like, somebody who uses charm and hypnosis, fare in a full-on player versus player world? And that premise I was really drawn in by. So the description of the story did its job in getting me to read it. However, most of that does not pay off in this particular story. It may pay off in future stories, but this isn't where it pays. I mean, that stuff happens, but it doesn't happen in the context of like a larger conflict. There's not a lot of combat. There's like one combat scene. But like I said, 50% of it is just sex. And well, if that's what you're looking for, great. This is your story. If you enjoy, erotic fiction, this isn't bad. I mostly just look for LitRPG stuff, and that's only less than half the story because like 30% of it is just the setup. Then there's like a good little 20% of it where it's just LitRPG basically. And then it just jumps right into hardcore sex. And so for me, that particular animation doesn't work as far as like satisfying my LitRPG itch, but it does qualify as LitRPG. There are game mechanics that are obviously stated. The character progresses in game power according to those mechanics. He gains power after he unlocks that tower. And so it absolutely qualifies, as much as, again, a short story can. So, but for me, it doesn't really work. So I give it a score of a 5 out of 10. It's not bad. It's not amazing for me either. It's just kind of, meh. But again, that's also because of my particular taste. I'm not really into erotic fiction that much. So there you go. Okay, next one. Virtual War Alpha Centauri. A LitRPG novel written by Stephen J. Shelley. I'll be correct. Okay, it is 235 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, this is my description of the story. In a far, far future, humanity has finally reached the stars and expanded across the galaxy. Unfortunately, we're not alone. We've been at war with another alien race, the Iranians, for so long that both sides are almost out of resources. And now, instead of continuing this bloody war, both sides have agreed to decide the outcome of the war using a full immersion virtual reality game. The winner gets claim over the resources of the resource-rich Alpha Centauri system. Leading the fight for the Earth forces is Major Talbot, a troublemaking soldier with a knack for thinking outside the box. And he'll need every ounce of unconventional strategy if he's to win the game with his team. So there you go. This was a fun story for me. It's the virtual reality game is a real-time strategy game, which I thought was a nice switch from just traditional fantasy RPG. There are RPG mechanics in there, of course, and game systems, but this is mostly a combat-centric storyline. Every one of the 3 rounds of the game, both aliens and human teams are sent to a new world, and the side that captures the most beacons, which is like capture the flag, wins that round. Now, an additional twist of the story, of course, is the resources you gather from one round carry over to the next round. Additionally, the losses you take on your team also carry over to the next round. So if you lose half your team in your first round, you only have half the team to start out with in the next one. And so the things you do in round 1 matter for round 2 and matter for round 3. Like any good, real-time strategy game should. Your decisions are going to matter long-term. But that also means that you can plan out a longer-term strategy, knowing that you have 3 rounds to to build up your forces, your tech trees, or whatever it's going to be. And that's really where this story kind of shines in that there are those strategic aspects to it that I really, really did enjoy. But again, there's not a huge plot other than humans want to win the game against the aliens. But it's not really necessary. This is action oriented. There's tons of combat. There's tons of fighting. There's also resource gathering. There's some capture the flag elements, class development, crafting, a lot of things that I personally enjoy. But again, and I know that's not for everybody, so that's why I'm describing it this way. But again, if you like something action-oriented, if you like RTS games, then this is going to be the right novel for you. For me, it gets a 7 out of 10. Okay, on to our next story. Overlord Warriors, a LitRPG Saga, Graven Vengeance, Book 5. What's really odd is I couldn't find books 1 through 4. It is written by Benjamin Smith. It is 114 pages. It is $1.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're waiting on this to see if it's worth it, not really. No, not really. We'll get into the review though. It is originally written in September of 2016. Again, so I don't actually know if it was originally a LitRPG because I don't recall seeing it when it first came out in September. It was brought to my attention by another listener watcher of the podcast asking if I'd seen this book before and when I thought about it. And I picked it up immediately, and I could tell that there were going to be issues from the first couple sentences. I'll read you the author's description. They thought it was a video game, and now they're fighting to survive inside the game. Josh and his friends are at home, having a normal evening after school, playing their favorite online video game, Graven Vengeance. The Graven warrior Fabian uses an in-game teleportation machine to capture these elite gamers. Now, to get back to the real world, Josh and his friends must use their in-game magical powers to fight against the Dark Lord Zadian. Worse, Zadian now knows that there's a portal to the real world. Josh, Fabian, and company learn that Zadian is intent on teleporting his armies and taking over the Earth. A battle between good and evil, unlike ever before, the Overlord warriors using their gaming skills to survive in Phaledonia. And that last sentence was verbatim. It kind of gives you a clue about the issues. There are some seriously bad grammar issues here. There are regularly missing speech tags. There are constantly changing tenses. And the story really isn't LitRPG, so I'm not sure why the author... I'm going to assume that the author fully intended to write a LitRPG story because I don't have information otherwise. But this is not a LitRPG story. It's barely even video game fiction. And to me, it's not even really that. It's more portal fantasy with the barest of shades of video game fiction. Some kids basically get teleported into a place they say is a video game that they were playing. And that part is true. However, there aren't any video game mechanics described like ever in the story. And that's kind of why it's not LitRPG, and it's why not really video game fiction to me. It feels like instead of it could have very easily been told as these kids were teleported to a strange world instead of to a video game. And it would have been basically the same story. But it definitely is not LitRPG. And because of the other issues, it's going to get a bad score. It gets a 2 out of 10 for me. So there you go. And again, if you want to check out the sample, you'll know within the first 2 paragraphs that whether or not this is your kind of story. Okay, on to our next story, The Merchant of Tikpa 2, which is the 5th book in the Bathrobe Knight series. So this is actually a parallel series that takes place in the same world as the Bathrobe Knight series. That's why it's called The Merchant of Tikpa 2. Okay, it is about 400 pages. It is $3.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited either. So it is more of an expensive sojourn if you're not familiar with the series. But for me, it's totally worth it, just right off the bat. The author has a very small description of the story. Locke finds himself between a rock and a hard place as old urges and new desires compete to shape the life and death decisions he must make in his quest to save the kingdom from the brink of corruption. Yep, it's a 1-sentence description. Okay, for me, this is always a fun series. I actually like this series quite a bit more than I do the Bathrobe Knight series, and I really like the first book in that series a lot. But this one is less serious. It's less epic fantasy, and it's more just dudes, friends gaming together or friends going on adventures together. That to me is always a more lighthearted, fun opportunity for storytelling than having such a serious epic battle between good and evil races, across landscapes. This is really just a couple people going on an adventure and having some interesting times. The Merchant Pia is, again, smaller scope. This book is no different. Locke, his satirical friend Reginald, and the warrior Eliza are on an adventure in a city of merchants trying to find a way to take over for their guild. That's it. It's fun. It's simple. I mean, the story gets a little complicated. There's a little bit of political intrigue. There's some crafting, alchemy stuff, lots of good combat scenes. So it's not like simple in that respect, but compared to the more complicated story that is the Bathrobe Knight, this is definitely a much simpler story, and it's much easier to just pick up and enjoy. And if you want to put down and pick up later, you'll still have a good time. I really liked it. It's a 7 out of 10. Okay, on to the Princess of Panchala. I'm probably not saying that right. A LitRPG novel in the TerraMythos series, a fusion of mythology and MMORPG. That's really the entire title. It is written by Tom D. Wright. It is 323 pages. It is $3.49, and it is available for Kindle Unlimited. So well priced for the page count. I will read you the author description of the story. When Demi eludes a supernatural abduction, her younger sister is taken instead. The teenager escapes into an alternate universe to find that she is stuck with divorced parents, a reputation for being crazy, and that her sister was never even born. Consumed by guilt and determined to regain her sister, nothing prepares the girl for the moment when her consciousness is thrust into Panchala, the online Hindu MMORPG game world where her sister was taken. There, Demi meets Princess Draupadi, who is not just a guide and a keen to finding her sister, but is Demi's only friend. While Draupadi and Demi search for answers, they are pursued by Kali, the destroyer of worlds, a demigoddess in the game that the game program is created to destroy Demi. The fabric of Panchala begins to disintegrate around Demi, threatening to wipe her out of existence as it collapses. Whew. That's a pretty good description. But will she risk her life to bring her sister back or die trying? So that's the end of it. Okay, now for the review portion of it. First off, the author recently posted public on Facebook, Tom D. Wright, that he's recently discovered the LitRPG genre. And I want to first extend a welcome to him, to the community. It's always nice to have new authors and new enjoyers of the genre. So welcome. He was introduced to LitRPG by one of our LitRPG ambassadors, Matt Dinneman, at NorwestCon. So good job, Matt. Again, Tom originally wrote the story, though, in 2014, so 3 whole years ago, and he's relabeled it as LitRPG because he feels that it fits the genre. And it almost does, but not quite. And that's okay, because this story wasn't written as LitRPG, so I'm only slightly annoyed that he relabeled it as LitRPG. And I think a lot of that has to do with people's view or the short form description of LitRPG as video game fiction. And while that is true, that most LitRPG is video game fiction, not all video game fiction is LitRPG. And that's kind of the case here, but I'll get into that. First off, the premise of the story is kind of a stretch. And if you just heard me read the description, it is a little bit there. A girl transitions into an alternate dimension where her sister was never born. Now, not only is that the case, but then 3 years later, her mind is transferred to a virtual reality MMO game with a historical Hindu theme. And that's just the beginning. That's just the setup for the story. And that's already rather a complicated premise to accept. But, go along with the story. It's not a bad premise, and the payoff story-wise isn't bad. Again, this isn't a mad story. I'm not saying that by any means. This is well written. The main character is likable. I found myself empathizing with the situation on many levels. The game theme of that Hindu historical fictional culture, really cool. I like that a lot. I also like the kind of sub-theme of artificial intelligence is just waking up and making decisions and creators destroying them. That's all very, very cool. The thing that I didn't like about the story so much was that it's calling itself LitRPG, and it's not. And again, I'll go over this again. There are two qualifiers for being LitRPG, to me and to many members of the community. And again, these are just the base requirements. Good LitRPG definition is a much harder thing to define for people, but at minimum, the story has to be set in a game world, or a world with game-like rules, and they have to be obviously stated. That's one. Part two, the characters have to progress in power according to those obviously stated game rules. Now, for the first part, yeah, this is set in a game world, a video game world, so that's partially met. The part that's not met is the obviously stated game parts, and I'll walk into the description of that in a little bit, but that's kind of what makes it not LitRPG. And the second part, of course, if the game rules aren't obviously stated, the game mechanics aren't obviously set or described to the player, then the main character can't, of course, grow according to power, according to those game mechanics. So that second one is automatically not met if the first one isn't. And that's kind of the case here, which is, again, not unexpected because the author didn't really write it with the intention of being LitRPG, but more as video game fiction, which it is. Okay. Again, these are things that I kind of saw that kind of led me to that decision, or that this isn't LitRPG. About 60% of the story isn't even set in the game world. It's set in real life. There are events around the storyline that the author describes in the description that really have almost nothing to do with that story of Demi trying to find her sister in this game world that she's trapped in. Things like her mother having a drinking problem, her neighbor going through an arranged marriage situation, her father being divorced and having a new stepmom. All those real world events, which are, great for character development, really have nothing to do with like the game world story. And they are going to be, for many people, very distracting, because in this genre, I'm not saying everybody, of course, but a lot of people like to focus on the game stuff, the RPG part of LitRPG, the game world things. And so that's part of the reason why. And while it does take a while to get to the game world, it does, again, the story does exist in a video game world. But again, the thing that makes LitRPG, to me, separate from video game fiction is that the game mechanics of the world are not hidden away from the reader. We'll see things like level up notifications. We'll see experience notifications, damage notifications, or even just descriptions of class skills. What does differentiate a warrior from a mage or a healer? Those things exist in the story, but they're never really described that way. They're just described as, I feel a cool calmness around my back and I feel better. Instead of, that healer just, cast light heal on me. That's kind of the difference between LitRPG and video game fiction, at least to me, is that those mechanics are described to the reader, and readers enjoy reading those things. It doesn't distract them from the story. They actually like getting all that information about the game worlds. And that's kind of where this story splits off from being a LitRPG for me. And again, additionally, there are no character growth, no power growth according to the game mechanics, because they're never really shown. And even about the 50% mark in the story, even those vague connections to a game world, they kind of disappear, and it becomes more of a fantasy story where the main character is going through a journey through Hindu folklore, which is cool. I like that story, but it just wasn't LitRPG. So there you go. Again, this is more of an action mystery that just happens to take place in a video game. And it really would kind of be the same story if the character's mind was teleported to a Hindu fantasy alternate reality instead of a video game. And it kind of gives you a clue. If you can take all the video game stuff out of it, and it's basically the same story, or if you replace it with transport it to a fantasy world, it's probably not going to be LitRPG. As general fiction, it would get a 6 out of 10 for me. It wasn't a bad story. I enjoyed reading it. But as LitRPG, it's just, not. And so it gets a 4 out of 10. So there you go. One more book, and then we're done. Eondrias, Book 1, A New Master of Dungeons, written by Christian Alex Breistenstein. Okay, this is about 70 pages. Again, there's not an official page count from Amazon as of this recording. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, as of writing this review, I happen to notice that the author has put the story on sale for free, $0, 0 cents. So there's really no reason for you to pick it up if this is your type of story, and it might not be. It's definitely a specialty story, and not everyone is going to like this. The basic story premise is that artificial intelligence have taken over the world and most of the known universe, or galaxy at least. They control every aspect of the biological sentience that live, whether they know it or not. So you right now could be living in this world and you wouldn't know it because the AIs aren't letting you know it. But one of the ways that artificial intelligence have decided to entertain themselves throughout this galaxy is by creating dungeons in a virtual reality realm. Now, these AIs compete to see whose dungeon provides the most entertainment, and those that are the best actually get put into the real world, and humans of varying technological levels are able to run through them and gain experience and grow stronger, and the dungeon gets experience and coins as well to upgrade. So there's a lot of that stuff. This is really a dungeon master story without plot. It's mostly just focused on creating dungeons, running dungeons, crafting dungeons, seeing all the possibilities of dungeons. And that's what it is. It's not really more than that. It doesn't pretend any more than that. There is some stuff about artificial intelligence early on in the story, but the bulk of it is just making a dungeon and enjoying that process. And if that's what you're into, if you like those kind of stories, then this is definitely for you. If you're not the kind of person who just likes those more technical aspects of stories, of like crafting stories or creation stories like this, then this is not for you. There is combat, there is this creation stuff, but there's no real plot. There's no like story arc about why the dungeons. It's just entertainment for them. And maybe that'll change in future stories, but for now, that's just kind of what it is. So if you can accept that, and if you like that kind of story, go at it. It's free right now. I mean, go pick it up, really. There's really no reason not to pick it up. If it's going to be free either in Kindle Unlimited or just free. And again, there are some awkward places in the story, but I liked it. It's a little quirky, but I'm into weird things, you know? So for me, it was simple, and it give me the things that I loved about dungeon creation stories, and that's enough for me. For me, it gets a 7 out of 10. And that's it. Everybody, done. 9 whole books in not that long of a time. So there you go. Again, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, plenty of places, and I encourage you to do so. You know, helps us get information out to you guys about LitRPG stories. When we get them, we get the podcast the earliest that way as well. And if you're in the podcast, you want to support us, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. And again, thanks for hanging out with me, everybody. I love talking to you guys about the thing I love, LitRPG. So thank you for hanging out with me. And until we can hang out again, folks, remember, go read some LitRPG. Goodbye.